At its peak, America Online had more than 30 million paying subscribers, a market valuation that briefly touched $160 billion, and a deal that reshaped the entire media landscape. Then, within a decade, it was worth almost nothing. The company that introduced most Americans to the internet became a cautionary tale about what happens when a business mistakes its delivery mechanism for its destination. The story begins not with the internet as we know it, but with the problem of getting ordinary people onto it at all. In the early 1990s, the internet was a technical environment built by researchers and engineers. It had no friendly face, no obvious entry point, and no tolerance for the uninitiated. AOL, operating under Steve Case, solved that problem with a walled garden, a curated, simplified online experience delivered through proprietary software and, famously, through millions of floppy disks and CD-ROMs mailed directly to American households. The pitch was not here is the internet. The pitch was here is something safe, simple, and already set up for you. That distinction would eventually become AOL's undoing, but in the mid-1990s, it was a stroke of genuine commercial genius. The model worked for a precise structural reason. Dial-up internet access required configuration, patience, and technical literacy that most households simply did not have. AOL removed every barrier. The software installed itself. The interface was navigable by anyone. Customer support was available. And the content, email, chat rooms, news, entertainment, was all contained within AOL's own environment. Users did not need to know what TCP/IP meant. They just heard the modem handshake and they were in. That sound became one of the most recognizable audio signatures of an entire era. It signaled connection, novelty, and possibility in a way that no technology sound before it quite had. Growth compounded rapidly through the late 1990s. AOL's subscriber base climbed from roughly 1 million in 1994 to more than 20 million by the end of the decade. Advertising revenue followed the eyeballs. The company acquired CompuServe, purchased Netscape, and positioned itself as the dominant gateway to the connected world. By 1999, AOL's stock had risen to levels that made it, on paper, one of the most valuable media and technology companies on Earth. The cultural footprint matched the financial one. The phrase "you've got mail" was not just a film title, it was a phrase that genuinely meant something to tens of millions of people who checked their inboxes with real anticipation. The peak arrived, and with it, the deal that would define AOL's legacy. In January 2000, AOL announced a merger with Time Warner, valuing the combined entity at approximately $350 billion. AOL's inflated stock price gave it the leverage to effectively acquire one of the oldest and most asset-rich media conglomerates in the world. It was the largest corporate merger in American history at that point, and it was announced at almost exactly the moment the structural crack beneath AOL became irreversible. That crack had been forming for years. AOL's entire business model depended on two conditions: that dial-up access remained the primary way people connected to the internet, and that users would continue to prefer AOL's enclosed environment over the open web. Both conditions were already eroding before the Time Warner deal closed. Broadband internet, faster, always on, delivered through cable and telephone infrastructure, was expanding steadily. Broadband users had no need for AOL's dial-up software. They connected directly, and once they did, the question became obvious. Why stay inside AOL's garden when the entire web was available? The open web, with its search engines, independent news sites, and emerging social platforms was demonstrably richer than anything AOL's walled garden could offer. The garden was losing its walls, and the users were noticing. The decisions made under these pressures compounded the structural problem rather than addressing it. The Time Warner merger, rather than creating a coherent digital media powerhouse, produced a deeply conflicted organization. The cultures of the two companies were incompatible. Time Warner's traditional media divisions, film, cable, publishing, had little operational synergy with AOL's subscription internet business. Integration was slow, contentious, and expensive. Meanwhile, the dot-com collapse in 2000 and 2001 destroyed the advertising market that AOL had counted on to diversify its revenue beyond subscriptions. The combined company wrote down goodwill losses that eventually totaled nearly $100 billion, among the largest accounting write-downs in corporate history. That figure alone tells you something about the distance between the merger's premise and its reality. The unraveling accelerated as broadband penetration rose through the early 2000s. AOL's subscriber count, which had peaked at around 26 million in 2002, began a decline that proved impossible to reverse. Each year, more households switched to broadband providers, cable companies, telephone carriers, who bundled internet access without any need for AOL's software layer. The company attempted to reposition itself as a free, advertising-supported web portal, abandoning the subscription model that had built it. But by then, Google, Yahoo, and a new generation of web services had already captured the audiences and the advertising dollars that AOL needed. The portal strategy arrived too late, and with too little differentiation to matter. The outcome was a structured retreat. Time Warner formally dropped AOL from its corporate name in 2003, a symbolic acknowledgement that the merger's premise had failed. In 2009, AOL was spun off as an independent public company, separating it from Time Warner entirely. Its market capitalization at that point was a fraction of what it had been at the merger's announcement. Verizon acquired AOL in 2015 for approximately $4.4 billion, a number that sounds large in isolation, but represents a collapse of roughly 97% from the peak valuation. Verizon later sold AOL and Yahoo together to private equity firm Apollo Global Management in 2021 for $5 billion, under the brand name Yahoo. The trajectory from $350 billion to $5 billion across 2 decades is one of the steepest destructions of corporate value in the history of American business. The human and institutional aftermath was significant. Thousands of employees lost jobs across multiple rounds of restructuring. The Netscape browser, once the dominant way people access the web, was discontinued. Time Warner's shareholders, who had exchanged stakes in a profitable traditional media company for shares in the merged entity, absorbed enormous losses. The deal became a standard reference point in business school curricula for merger failure, cultural incompatibility, and the danger of using inflated equity as acquisition currency. It remains that reference point today. The precise mechanism worth understanding here is not hubris, and it is not one bad decision. AOL built genuine value by solving a real access problem for a specific technological moment. The structural weakness was that the solution was inseparable from the constraints of that moment. When the constraints changed, when broadband made the dial-up layer unnecessary, and when the open web made the walled garden feel like a cage, AOL's value proposition dissolved. The Time Warner merger did not cause that dissolution. It amplified the consequences by tying an asset in structural decline to a company that could not absorb the losses without severe damage of its own. Two vulnerabilities merged into one catastrophe. The question that follows naturally from AOL's story is whether any company that owns a distribution layer can survive when the layer itself becomes obsolete, and whether the answer changes if the company also owns the content being distributed. That tension between pipe and product, between access and destination, did not end with AOL. It simply moved to different industries, different companies, and different technological transitions. The mechanism repeats. The names change,